Really, the goal of Hermetic initiation and any other kind of initiation would be to transcend our mortality and put us back into our ultimate state as spiritual peers.
The Hermeticum dazzled Renaissance scholars, and occultism was reborn. Could the idea that human beings shared a direct link to God undermine the authority of the Church? The discovery of the Hermeticum during the Renaissance created a new generation of occultists. They sought to combine religion with science and magic, a dangerous undertaking in a society ruled by Christianity. John Dee would risk his life to study its teachings.
John Dee was a giant. John Dee was the embodiment of the ideal of an enlightened being who had the spiritual understanding of his role and mission in life, and who was gifted with, superior intelligence.
But like Pythagoras, he would pay a heavy price for daring to seek out the wisdom of the gods. The ultimate Renaissance man, Dee followed in the footsteps of Paracelsus, using experimentation to become a gifted scientist, an inventor, a mathematician, a brilliant cryptographer, and a pioneer in the field of navigation.
But he was also an occultist, he was a sorcerer, he was an astrologer. He was, in fact, Queen Elizabeth's personal court astrologer. And in that sense, his interests were all very much in keeping with the thinking of the time. There wasn't a distinction made between magic and science, and he was pursuing an understanding of the world around him.
When Queen Elizabeth rose to the throne of England in 1558, she installed Dee as court astrologer, but his influence reached far beyond his position. England's famous magician was also a spy for the Queen.
He was involved with political intrigue. He was a trusted ally of the Queen, but he was also working behind the scenes throughout Europe to help to lower the power of the Church and to substitute Protestant power in its stead.
With Dee's guidance, Queen Elizabeth officially legitimized the most significant occult science of the Renaissance, alchemy. Alchemists had two goals: to heal illness and to turn base metal into gold. They believed success could be achieved by finding the Philosopher's Stone, a mystical agent that would also produce a higher level of consciousness in the alchemist. Alchemy had existed since the early Egyptians, but in the hands of the Renaissance scientists, it reached new heights.
Everything that we know and do today in our modern science was developed by the alchemists. Laboratory techniques were part of the alchemical tradition. The observation of results, the scientific method is a child of alchemy.
Alchemists were on the leading edge of science. They discovered phosphorus, zinc, the distillation of alcohol, the germ nature of diseases. They were the first to understand how blood circulates in the body. The Church viewed their unorthodox experiments and scientific breakthroughs with growing suspicion.
We are speeding up what nature does. We're speeding up the rate at which the metals evolve. We're speeding up the rate at which medicines are combined and raise consciousness. And the Church felt that you can't be speeding up God's creation without recourse to demons.
Despite his work in alchemy, Dee's true occult passion lay in divination. He believed that he could apply scientific methods to communicate with supernatural beings. Dee's obsession with contacting the angels would have disastrous consequences. This art of manipulating objects like bones, tea leaves, and tarot cards had arrived from the Muslim East in the 14th century and become a popular method of fortune-telling. But Dee used a divination method known as scrying. Dee relied on looking into a crystal ball that would reflect back supernatural information.
Scrying is a long-time-old technique, scrying into glasses, mirrors, bodies of water, anything that would have a reflective surface, and see if you could see not just the material things, but the spiritual things standing behind.
These efforts were unsuccessful until one day a young man named Edward Kelly appeared at his door. Kelly seemed to have the talent to see into the shadow world.
Their system involved Edward Kelly looking into a amethyst crystal and describing what he saw, and John Dee would then record these communications.
Kelly began receiving messages from the angels. They spoke in a language he called Enochian, from the lost biblical book of Enoch. These transmissions are early examples of what New Age followers now call channeling.
What Dee and Kelly brought forth was completely new. It was not based on tradition.
He appeared to be speaking a new language.
The Enochian language does appear to have a coherent vocabulary and syntax, and this doesn't seem like the sort of thing that Kelly, who was not a particularly educated or schooled person, could have just invented. He couldn't have faked something like that.
John Dee and Kelly embarked on a tour of Europe to share their discoveries, just as the Inquisition launched another crackdown against heretics.
All you needed was a slight change in political or religious circumstance, and something that was considered exceptionally wonderful would then be considered demonic and scary.
Dee returned home to England to find that a mob had destroyed his irreplaceable library and scientific and occult instruments. Dee had fallen out of favor with the court. The man who began as a leading scientist of the Renaissance ended his life penniless, branded as a sorcerer.
Dee's main legacy was not to science, it is to magic. And it's because of those who have come after, who have seized upon what he created and made it into a new worldview, whether it's consciousness arts or ceremonial magic or divination, could take place inside these new parameters that they set up.
John Dee's fall was the beginning of the occult's end. The practices were reviled by the church as the work of demonic possession. From the 14th through the 16th century, more than 40,000 people would be executed for witchcraft. Occult ideas became embedded in the traditions of secret societies, such as the Freemasons and the Rosicrucians.
They were tending to do them passed on among secret brotherhoods and organizations because these are very powerful and dangerous ideas, dangerous to status quo, dangerous to institutionalized religion. So there's an element of underground secrecy associated with some of these themes.
These havens of safety began to flourish across Europe. Secret societies were instrumental in the new age of enlightenment that swept through Europe in the 1700s and even helped in the founding of American democracy. Participation in these organizations had fallen dramatically by the mid-1800s as they became more civic-minded and less interested in the occult. So what would cause a resurgence in the occult? In rural New York, two unlikely sisters would inspire a national obsession with the occult. Magic would once again capture imaginations. On March 31st, 1848, Sisters Leah and Margaret Fox publicly declared that they had contacted spirits from beyond the grave. An American fascination for communicating with the dead occurred almost overnight. The Fox sisters used a technique called a seance, which quickly became one of America's most popular pastimes. People gathered in a darkened room while a medium tried to make contact with the spirit world.
There would be tambourines and other bells that would sound, and the medium would actually be able to exude, ectoplasm from their nostrils or their mouth, and it was this sort of spiritual substance that allowed the spirits of the dead to manifest and appear. And in other cases, the medium would simply become a conduit or a channel through which the deceased were able to speak.
Many who practiced spiritualism believed it would lead to scientific proof of the existence and immortality of the soul. And they gained an iconic champion when the Russian-born Madame Blavatsky arrived in New York at the height of spiritualism's popularity. She soon became the self-proclaimed decoder of ancient occult secrets.
She grew up in a wonderful occult library that her father had established. She could see the connections between different cultures, spiritual teachings, and she was attempting to correct the errors of Christianity by bringing in mysticism and spirituality from other cultures.
Born in the Ukraine in 1831 to a lower-ranking nobleman, Blavatsky was married early, but she abandoned her husband to spend 10 years traveling the world. She claimed to have studied with mystical adepts in India and Tibet. The exotic cigar-smoking medium became a sensation in the occult circles.
She just wouldn't accept limits. She was one of the most educated person anybody who met her had ever met. And they couldn't understand, how could this powerful intellect be in this female body, just chewing up the landscape and producing this tremendous inspiration?
Blavatsky's seances were the talk of New York. Mysterious letters would appear, written by spiritual leaders she called the Great White Brotherhood.
Blavatsky was not above taking advantage of the popularity of seances to push her own cause, and she used these seances to, in very spectacular effect, to materialize letters written by these ascended masters as instructions being passed down to her.
The Brotherhood dictated to her the books that became the foundation of a new science of mysticism, theosophy.
Blavatsky wrote essentially two gigantic collections, Isis Unveiled and The Secret Doctrine, which purported to be the teachings, the secret teachings of this kind of Eastern brotherhood, the mystery schools of initiation. And she totally altered the spiritual landscape of Western civilization by introducing those concepts.
She was very much a pioneer in bringing ideas of Eastern esotericism into the West. She focused on the similarities between Christianity and Hinduism and Buddhism and other spiritual traditions, arguing that there is in fact a tradition that underlies all spiritual faiths in the world.
Blavatsky regarded her work as spiritual science and made connections between recent scientific advancements and occult beliefs. Blavatsky promoted the ancient Eastern mystical view that the essential nature of the world was not matter, but energy, which foreshadowed the discoveries of modern physics. Born in 1875, Aleister Crowley was raised in a strict religious household. His mother nicknamed him the Beast from the Book of Revelation. It was a title he embraced his entire life.
He identified himself as the Antichrist, as the force that would take away this terrible Christian program which had so warped his childhood.
Crowley began studying the occult as a member of the Golden Dawn.
The Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn was the secret society par excellence of the Victorian age in England. It brought together, again, the knowledge that was available at that point in time. So you had tarot, and you had Kabbalah, and you had John Dee's angelic magic and Rosicrucian traditions, all being melded together under a single system.
The Golden Dawn attracted many of the London intelligentsia. Crowley, though, ultimately broke away from the group. He would find his own system of belief after a trip to Egypt, where his wife received a mystical signal that told him to prepare himself for a message from the gods. Heeding the call, he began spontaneously writing a book he called the Book of the Law.
This book announces a new law for mankind. And in fact, it tells us that we are very emboldened and brightened spiritual entity, that in fact, we are as the gods.
The Book of the Law was another synthesis of Eastern and Western spirituality. Crowley called his new system the Lima. It incorporated principles of magic that he said he had learned from ancient Egyptian and other occult sources. He became a self-proclaimed master of action at a distance, focusing the power of his intention or will to create desired effects.
Aleister Crowley defined magic as the art and science of causing change to occur in conformity with the will. And his whole approach is basically to empower the practitioner to make their intentions happen, to materialize what they want to have happen in the world.
Thalima's fundamental law was, "Do what thou wilt shall be the whole of the law. Love is the law. love under will. While this may have meant pursuing a higher path for some, for others, it excused every variety of deviant behavior. Some critics claim that Crowley himself was one of its worst offenders.
Crowley was practicing sexuality as a spiritual path. He reduced a great deal of symbolic teachings to their essence, which is essentially the duality or the polarity between male and female. And he experimented greatly within that sphere to understand what mysteries were contained within the sexual act.
Crowley went on to start his own secret society, the Ordo Templi Orientis, and wrote numerous books about meditation and ceremonial magic. He also helped reinterpret tarot for the 20th century.
The tarot is a pictorial representation of occult teachings. It's a method of going within and contacting archetypal levels within oneself, spiritual levels, and entering meditative state in which intuition is heightened and maybe even, where you can see certain patterns developing because you're in the right state of mind.
While popularized by Italian noblemen in the 1300s as playing cards, some say tarot's origins date to ancient Egypt. Over time, they acquired occult significance. Crowley developed a deck of his own called the Book of Thoth, based on the Egyptian magic he had studied. A popular divination tool today, tarot is said to reveal information about the seeker and the questions about his future.
Everything that's related in one moment of time is all connected. So if two people come together around a question and they're manipulating an oracular tool like this, but if that manipulation is intended to serve the need and the feeling, then it will make a mirroring reflection of the energy that's produced between the two people.
Crowley's writings, like Madame Blavatsky's, were heralded as forerunners of many New Age ideas. But despite his serious work in occultism, ultimately he became infamous for his use of drugs and decadent sexual behavior. As Hitler rose to power in the 1930s, Crowley's reputation was fatally damaged. He wrote pro-Nazi propaganda and was soon an outcast. After World War II, it was rumored that Hitler had used Crowley's and Madame Blavatsky's writings to help him create his theory of a master race.
I don't think there's any evidence that Hitler read the works of Aleister Crowley per se. It's definitely known that Hitler and members of his regime had a very keen interest in the occult, and they adopted the trappings of occult symbolism.
Ill and addicted to opium, Crowley spent his final days in a boarding house and died in 1947. Like other occultists before him, Crowley attempted to learn the secrets of the gods, only to be discredited and condemned by society.
I think that in the cases of these great thinkers in history that we see ultimately being persecuted for their beliefs, what's happening there is that these people are very forward-thinking and they challenge our preconceptions. They make people uncomfortable. From that level of discomfort and that level of fear and that threat that thinking has to people's power base that leads societies and governments and other institutions to act against people who speak out in that way.
Once again, occultism seemed to disappear. It would take the drugs, rebellion, and social upheaval of the 1960s to usher in its next revival. Occult practices languished on the fringes of society for most of the 20th century, but they resurfaced during the hippie movement of the 60s. Popular gurus like the Maharishi and Timothy Leary promoted altered states of consciousness that could lead to higher levels of self-awareness. Individualism became the goal of millions of young people who rejected traditional religion to find their own direct route to God. By the 1980s, New Age ideas had become mainstream. Madame Blavatsky's writings became pivotal in reinterpreting occultism for modern audiences, and even Aleister Crowley's reputation was somewhat restored.
There was this boom in occult interest that resulted in Crowley being almost a pop culture icon. The Beatles put Aleister Crowley on the cover of Sgt. Pepper, You have musicians like David Bowie and Jimmy Page becoming very interested in Crowley. He experienced a renaissance, as it were, in the 60s and 70s and has been a very popular figure ever since.
Occult belief systems are now embraced by millions of New Age followers who pick and choose from their wide array of concepts to fashion their own individual brand of spirituality. Yet the occult is still often regarded with suspicion. Many of those who practice occultism describe it as a modern mystical quest.
The mystical quest is the process by which a limited, time-space-bound human being can transcend their background and history and come into this divinized or macrocosmic consciousness. And that is the process of becoming immortal. You know, leaving this physical flesh behind and being successively identified with larger and larger realms of reality.
The holistic philosophy of New Age beliefs continues to grow in popularity.
We're surrounded by material wealth and technology, and we feel like we've lost something. We've lost that connectedness. We've lost the understanding of our human roots. And a lot of the interest in New Age ideas and a lot of the look back to ancient ideas stems from that desire to reconnect with that history and to make us feel more whole, more spiritual, more connected, more aware of the passion and meaning of life around us.
But what began as occult magic has informed the world of science.
There were attempts, legitimate attempts, to try to understand the way the world works. And there would not be astronomy today if it had not been for the ancient astrologers who studied the heavens. There would not be chemistry today if it weren't for the alchemists who did their thing as well.
Some of the secrets that they thought they were working on were the secret of eternal life, the secret of being able to be without disease, then the great secrets of transformation, let's say of lead into gold, but that's like not the only one. Maybe one of the transformations is the human being into a godlike thing. And it's a wonderful thing that now we come around to particle physics and people thinking that life is pure energy and that maybe there is a connection between those ideas, that maybe the power to become godlike is in the ability to transform yourself.
Medicine and science have benefited from the input of occultism. And in the future, what we think of as magic may play a role in even greater discoveries.
In our push to science, we're a culture of specialists, very focused on particular areas. So I think some of that holistic nature from the past is necessary to make the breakthroughs that we are currently not able to make in science.
Beliefs can blind us, whether they're religious beliefs or scientific beliefs. And the great thing about these occult sorts of experiments is that they keep us open to possibility.
Despite the progress made by science, the modern world is still full of mysteries that may never be solved.
It's the unknowable, it's the mystery. And that mystery is the center of the spiritual quest. But it's also the center of the scientific quest and the artistic quest. That is what we're here on Earth to do, is seek after that mystery.
Like the first occultists, modern scientists will continue to search for ways to divine the mysteries of our world and the forces that have created them.